The coffee had already turned cold by the time I finished my morning shift at Mount Hope Clinic, a small medical office on the east side of Portland. I had brewed it at 6 o'clock in the morning, just before Abby woke up, before the familiar storm began waking her, urging her to change clothes, laying out breakfast, and preparing everything in time to drive her to school. Abby complained about her lunch again, as she always did. Too many vegetables, no cookies. I kissed her forehead and promised that next time I would add something sweet, though deep down I knew I wouldn't. Children need nourishment, not sugar. At 38, I have learned patience in ways my 20-year-old self could never have imagined. Patience with patients who complain, with the tangle of health insurance paperwork, with those who call in the middle of the night because of a persistent cough. But above all, I have learned to be patient with myself, with choices that once seemed right and later took shape as regret, seeping quietly into the stillness between work and sleep. I live quietly, as if swimming through water without ripples, scent, or color. Each morning I park in the northern corner of the lot, walk past 2 buildings to the clinic, start the coffee machine before opening the first patient chart. Each afternoon I pick up Abby from her after-school class, listening to her chatter in the car, who drew the best picture, who took whose seat at lunch. We live in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor overlooking a park where autumn leaves glow like red wine and winter fades into the white blur of Oregon fog. Everyone around me believes I am Dr. Erin Callahan, a graduate of the Chicago School of Medicine, a cardiologist who once worked at St. Jude Hospital before moving to Portland to find a quieter life. No one asks beyond that. They see the wedding ring on my hand, though there is no husband. They see how much I love Abby, though no one has ever seen a photo of her father. In a place like Portland, people respect privacy, sometimes to the point of indifference. And I need that. I need them to believe in the shell I've lived within for nearly 8 years. Because the truth, if ever unearthed, would not only shatter the life I've fought to keep intact but threaten everything I have sacrificed to protect. There are nights, after Abby has fallen asleep, when I sit by the living room window with a glass of wine I never drink, my gaze lost in the dim, smoky light of the city sky. I don't think about myself much anymore. I think about her. Am I good enough? Strong enough? Clear-minded enough to keep her safe in a world I once fled from? The life I live now is a small box I built with the precision of medicine, the instinct of motherhood, and a sliver of luck that I haven't yet been found. But I know that box won't stay steady forever, and when it begins to tremble, nothing will ever be the same. If you are still listening and can feel the quiet rhythm beneath Erin's secrets, please subscribe to our channel to follow me deeper into the places where the past never truly sleeps. Don't forget to like and share this video so stories of love, fear, and redemption can reach more hearts. And I truly want to know, where are you listening from? Leave your city or country in the comments below, so together we can see how far the journey of Erin, of Emily Romano, has traveled. Thank you for staying, because sometimes, simply by listening, we are already walking beside a soul trying to find its way home. That night, after I tucked Abby into bed and straightened the ocean-patterned blanket she loved, I stood before the bathroom mirror, my toothbrush dangling loosely in hand. The light caught the first traces of time on my skin and the dark circles born of chronic sleeplessness. But what held my gaze wasn't the lines, it was the face itself. Es familiar, haunting. The face of a woman I had tried to bury for 8 long years. Emily Romano. The name no longer exists on paper, not in any record in the state of Oregon or anywhere else. Yet it lives inside my memory, the root that was never fully pulled out. Emily was the only daughter of Italian immigrants in New Jersey, raised in quiet evenings, scented with simmering tomatoes, and her mother's whispered warnings that there are questions a woman should never ask the men in her home. I studied hard, earned a full scholarship to medical school, carrying with me the dream of escaping that place and building a world without shadows, without secrets, without fear. I almost did. Until I met Vincent. Vincent Romano was not the kind of man a woman should love, but love does not obey reason. When we met, I was 29, in my final year of residency at Newark Hospital. He was the associate of a VIP patient under my care, surrounded by men in gray suits who spoke little and looked at everything as though it could be bought or erased. But Vincent was different. He looked at me as if I wasn't a tired young doctor but something that made him stop for a moment. That was the first look, and it was enough to begin a chain of mistakes I would carry for the rest of my life. I didn't know much about Vincent's world then, or perhaps I did and chose not to believe. The secret meetings, the late-night calls, the way his eyes went cold when I asked about his work. He never raised his hand to me, never controlled me like the men I had heard stories about. Yet there was something in him that made people withdraw without being told. When I discovered I was pregnant, I sat for 2 hours in the hospital restroom holding the test, my hands trembling too hard to turn on the faucet. I told no one. Not right away. I spent weeks imagining Vincent's reaction, imagining my child growing up behind bulletproof walls and guarded cars, in a house where love meant possession. I had met Dr. Matthew Green at a medical conference months earlier, a man who had once worked briefly within the witness protection program before turning to private practice. I didn't know why I trusted him. Maybe it was the faint trace of humanity in his eyes. When I told him everything, I could barely breathe for fear of rejection. But he listened. He didn't judge. Then he said, "You need a way out, and I will help you. Pretending to die is not an easy thing. It requires medical records, forensic reports, even a small burial staged so convincingly that those around Vincent would believe the baby had died, that I had broken and disappeared from the world." Vincent said nothing when he received the news. No calls, no messages. Only silence more terrifying than anger, as if the world had slipped off its axis. 3 days later, a mutual friend told me Vincent had attended a nearly empty funeral, stood before an unmarked grave, and walked straight into the darkness without leaving a trace. But I didn't. I came to Oregon under a new name, with new papers. My medical license re-established through the shadow network Dr. Green arranged. I rented a small apartment near the park and started over with a belly that grew heavier each day. Abby was born on a rain-soaked December night, small but strong. And from that moment on, I was no longer Emily. I was Erin Callahan, mother of a child whose father would never know she existed. A woman who had chosen to leave love behind to save her daughter from a life imprisoned by power. Yet standing before the mirror tonight, I cannot stop myself from looking past the mask. Emily is still there with her scars, with her unhealed fear, and I know that when the storm returns, and it will, Emily will have to rise again, to protect Abby once more, if necessary, at any cost. The next morning, Portland lay under a thin veil of fog that moved across the streets like a piece of sheer fabric. The cold sank deep into my bones as I stepped out of Mount Hope Clinic close to 6 in the evening, a stack of unfinished files tucked under my arm. My mind still heavy from the long shift. The parking lot was almost empty, a few cars sitting motionless under the dim amber lights. I fumbled for my keys inside my coat pocket and noticed a man leaning against a gray sedan parked near my car, as if he had been waiting for me. The faint light couldn't hide the firmness of his frame, tall, short brown hair, a suit that hadn't creased, despite the damp air. He straightened as I approached, his eyes fixed on me. "Dr. Erin Callahan?" His voice was calm, but there was something in his accent that set off a quiet alarm inside me. I tightened my grip around the keys, sliding one between my knuckles, exactly the way Dr. Green once taught me. "Who's asking?" I said, my eyes scanning the surroundings. The man pulled a slim leather wallet from his inner pocket and flipped it open just long enough for me to see a badge. Special Agent Colton Myers, FBI. He didn't step forward, didn't threaten, yet his presence alone seemed to narrow the air around us. I took half a step back. "I'm not saying anything without my lawyer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He nodded, as if anticipating it. "Your lawyer will tell you that cooperation is wiser than facing charges for obstructing a federal investigation." His head tilted slightly, eyes dark as earth, not hostile but devoid of warmth. "Falsifying a death certificate is a federal offense, Dr. Callahan. But we're not here to arrest you. We want to know why someone like you would do such a thing." I didn't answer. Inside me, my pulse began to climb, not from fear, but from the realization that everything I'd built was beginning to crack. Abby was still at her after-school class until 6. I had 45 minutes. I calculated quickly. I want immunity. In writing. Before I say anything, I said. Colton nodded, as if that were the response he'd been waiting for. Get in the car. I hesitated for a second. The gray sedan's interior was plain, cold leather seats, the faint scent of stale coffee and a hint of disinfectant. Colton drove toward the Willamette River, heading for the docks, a neutral ground. Not deserted enough to be dangerous, not crowded enough to draw attention. On the way, he spoke little, his tone even. Professional. We came across this during a routine cross-check. The records from Chicago Medical don't align with your licensing files in Oregon. There is no record of an Aaron Callahan in the federal database prior to 8 years ago, but there was an Emily Romano, declared deceased along with a pregnant woman who reportedly died from complications at 22 weeks. The medical report matches. Except, he looked at me, letting the rest hang in the air. I stayed silent, even though I had rehearsed for this moment. The hollow weight inside my chest spread fast. Who's looking for me? I finally asked, my voice rasping. Colton pulled into a riverside lot and turned to me. Not us. Not the government. Someone else. More dangerous. Organized. Personal. I closed my eyes briefly. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. Vincent, the underworld never forgives betrayal, especially when that betrayal is bound by blood. Colton's voice softened. You have a daughter, 8 years old, born roughly 9 months after you died. We know that, and we believe others know, too. I turned away, my gaze fixed on the mist above the river, my lungs tightening as if all the oxygen had been drained. 8 years of living as a ghost, and everything was collapsing back in an instant. You have 2 choices, Colton said after a pause. You can keep running until you're caught, or until they find you first, or you can work with us, and we'll make sure you and your daughter are protected for real this time. I drew a deep breath. In my mind, I saw Abby that morning, sitting on the porch, tugging at her sneakers, her hair a mess, her eyes bright as she talked about her art class. I couldn't let her be dragged into this, but I also knew the truth. There was no room left to hide. It was time to face what was coming. I didn't answer right away. After Colton's last words, we sat in the car for several minutes without speaking. Outside, the Willamette River was wrapped in a thin layer of mist, the sky deepening toward night. A slow freight train crossed the distant bridge, its low rumble echoing like a knock on a door I had locked 8 years ago. I need time, I said quietly, my voice soft but clear. Colton nodded, as if he had expected it. 48 hours. After that, the choice won't be yours anymore. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thin business card with nothing but his name, title, and phone number, and set it on the dashboard. Call me when you're ready, but don't wait too long. I opened the door before he could say another word, the cold air slapping my face like an open hand. I walked quickly toward my car, forcing myself to appear calm. Though my hands trembled so badly, it took 2 tries to get the key into the ignition. When the engine started, I didn't drive. I just sat there, his words circling in my head as if someone were whispering them into my ear. Not the government, not the FBI. Someone more dangerous is looking for you, Vincent. No matter how many years had passed, no matter how carefully I'd buried my existence beneath layers of documents and the illusion of normalcy, I had always known the day would come when that name returned. And now, it wasn't just my life, it threatened. It was coming for Abby. I drove to her school without remembering how many red lights I ran or wrong turns I made. When I saw her standing at the gate, backpack slung over her small shoulders, clutching her sketchbook with the cat on the cover, my heart clenched. I wanted to hold her tight, but I couldn't afford to panic. Not now. On the drive home, Abby chattered about her art class, a new friend she'd made, and her wish to keep a goldfish. I answered with steady murmurs of, and really, while my mind spun like a wheel with no brakes. After putting her to bed, I sat in the kitchen, one hand around a glass of cold water, the other sifting through the papers hidden in a file box beneath the cabinet. Abby's birth certificate, my passport, the medical credentials restored by an underground network, and at the bottom, a faded photograph Vincent and me at my 30th birthday party. In the picture, he wasn't smiling. He was looking at me as if calculating the world through my reflection. I had thought I could disappear. I had believed that if no one knew Abby was his, no one could ever touch us. But I was wrong. Nothing stays hidden forever. And now I had to choose. Colton wasn't wrong. Running would no longer save us. 8 years ago, I had time to plan, allies to rely on, and enough distance to vanish. Now the walls were closing in like iron jaws. If I cooperated with the FBI, I could secure official protection, but that meant confessing everything, Vincent. The past, the people who helped me. I could keep Abby safe, but I would betray those who once risked everything for me. I would face the law, and the thin, shifting line between survival and conscience. If I refused, I would have to keep running, this time with a child beside me, a child growing older, harder to hide, asking questions I couldn't answer. And the one searching for us wasn't the police. It was Vincent, the man who never forgets, never forgives, and now knows about the existence of an 8-year-old child who shares his blood. I looked up at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. I took out my phone, my thumb hovering over Colton's number. But I stopped. I needed more information. Before I staked everything on a deal with the government, I had to know who else was playing this game. Because sometimes the ones outside the system are the most dangerous, and the only ones who truly understand the scale of the threat. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. We stood and walked into the bedroom, where Abby slept soundly, her mouth slightly open, her arms wrapped around her stuffed bear. I kissed her forehead softly, whispering a silent vow to myself. Whatever I decide, I will not let her live in fear. Not like I did. Not ever again. The call came at lunchtime the next day while I was sitting alone in the clinic cafeteria. A plate of untouched salad in front of me. A strange number flashed across the screen, and my heart tightened on instinct. I let it ring twice before answering, forcing my voice to stay calm. "This is Erin Callahan." A woman's voice came through, low and steady. "My name is Gloria Baines. I'm an attorney representing a group of clients connected to your current situation. We need to meet." I straightened, gripping the phone tighter. "I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about." Her tone didn't change, measured, patient, the voice of someone used to handling matters no one else wanted to touch. "I believe Special Agent Colton Myers of the FBI contacted you yesterday. Before you agree to any government proposal, my clients would like to offer you a different perspective, particularly concerning your daughter's safety." The words seemed to thicken the air around me. I stood, carrying the phone out of the dining area, my eyes darting as if everyone could somehow hear us. "How do you know about Abby?" I whispered, each word scraping out of my throat. "Because the people who hired me have known about her for some time." She paused briefly, then continued in that same calm tone, as if discussing the weather. "Unlike the FBI, they're not interested in prosecuting you. They're interested in survival. They understand what Vincent Romano is doing and what will happen if he discovers the truth." I said nothing. Gloria went on. "We'll meet at Riverstone Cafe in the Pearl District. 2:00 this afternoon. Table by the window. I'll be alone. Don't bring anyone. And don't think the FBI is the only one watching you." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, the cold air slipping through my blouse. My mind flooded with questions, all circling around a single truth. Who was hunting me, and how did they know so much? At 10 minutes to 2, I pushed open the door of Riverstone Cafe. The warmth inside wrapped around me, the scent of coffee mingling with oak wood and pastries. She was there, at the last table by the window, exactly as she'd said. Her silver hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck. her ash-gray coat draped across her shoulders, one hand around a cup of black coffee, without cream or sugar. Her face was bare of makeup, every line shaped by decisions that had cost something. She gestured for me to sit, needing no introduction. "I know you think you've disappeared," Gloria began, her gaze level with mine. "And for 8 years, you've done an admirable job, but every illusion has an expiration date. You're no longer invisible, Aaron, and neither is your daughter." I didn't respond. She placed a paper envelope on the table and slid it toward me. Inside were printed photographs Abby outside her school, to me holding her hand as we left the clinic, and another of me beside my car in the parking lot, all taken from a distance. Clear, time-stamped, tracked. "We didn't do this to threaten you," Gloria said, as if reading my thoughts. "We did it to show that others could do the same if they wanted to. Vincent Romano now knows you're alive. And he's moving. I heard that from the FBI." I replied, steadying my voice. Gloria gave a small nod. "But the FBI only sees the law. They don't understand the wars between families. I'm here to tell you what they won't." She drew out another document, thinner this time. Only a few pages. Vincent's had long-standing tension with the Versetti family, now called Versiani after their merger. They recently learned that Vincent has a daughter. One he's kept hidden. To them, that's not news, it's leverage. They don't need to kill Abby. They only need to take her. Keep her long enough for Vincent to bow. The blood in my temples began to pound. "You're saying they plan to kidnap her?" Gloria looked at me as if measuring how much truth I could bear. "We call it securing an asset. And yes, the plan is already in motion. Their people have been in Portland for 3 days." I sat still, my hand wrapped so tightly around the untouched coffee that my knuckles ached. Gloria leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. "The FBI can offer you witness protection, a new name, a new home. But you won't be a doctor anymore. Abby won't be herself. And if they're found, the government won't be able to keep you safe." I stared at her, searching for something to contradict. But there was nothing. "Then what are you proposing?" Gloria sat back, eyes never leaving mine. "Call Vincent. Tell him the truth. Bring your daughter under the only protection this world truly recognizes: power. You don't have to trust me, but trust this. The people coming aren't looking to negotiate. They're coming to take what Vincent will never surrender." My heart pounded like a drum. But for the first time in years, I knew I was standing at the edge of a game I could no longer control. I could only choose a side. And time was running out. I hesitated for 2 hours after leaving Riverstone Cafe. During that time, I drove aimlessly through the Pearl District, like a shadow without direction. A part of me still hoped that someone, somewhere, would appear and offer another way out, one easier, cleaner, with less blood and fewer memories. But as the clock crept toward 8 and darkness folded over the city, I knew no one was coming. I was the only one who could protect Abby, and that meant facing the thing I had been running from for 8 years. I parked at the end of a quiet street beside the small park near our apartment. Abby was at the neighbor's house, playing with their daughter as she did every Tuesday evening. I needed this call to happen when she wasn't nearby, at least. That was the plan. I opened my wallet and pulled out the scrap of paper Gloria had slid across the table before leaving the cafe. A short string of numbers. No name. No area code. I typed them in one by one, as if entering a forbidden incantation. My hand trembled slightly. The phone rang once. Then a man's voice answered, soft but precise, carrying a distinct Italian edge. "Are you the woman Vincent has been mourning for 8 years?" My throat tightened. "This is Aaron Callahan. I need to speak with Vincent Romano. It's about the safety of his daughter." A long silence followed. I could hear footsteps, the faint hiss of wind through the line, as though someone was stepping out of the shadows and into the light. Then the voice spoke again, slow and deliberate. "There's a location. I'll send coordinates. Come alone. No phone. No weapons. If you bring documents, they'll be checked at the door." A text arrived seconds later, coordinates. I turned the car, my heart hammering so hard it felt ready to burst. I had always loved driving through Portland at night. The calm, the sense of the city wrapped in a thin blanket of quiet. But tonight, every streetlight carried the color of danger. By 9:30, I reached the old industrial district on the southern edge of the city. The warehouse I'd been sent to stood between cracked brick walls and rusted shipping containers. A man in a long coat and earpiece guarded the entrance. He said nothing, just gestured for me to go in. No search, no greeting. I walked down a long corridor where fluorescent lights flickered against damp concrete floors. At the end was a heavy iron door. When it opened, I stepped into a wide, echoing space, wooden floors, high ceilings, tall windows overlooking the docks. A figure stood with his back to me, facing the blurred outlines of ships in the misting rain. Vincent. I knew that stance, without needing to see his face. Broad shoulders, straight spine, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man who had learned to command through silence. When he turned, I wasn't ready for the flood that hit my chest. 8 years had left their mark. A new scar cut along his jaw. Shorter hair, eyes darker and deeper, colder. But the look in them, the look that once made me believe I could love a man like him and walk away unscathed, was still the same. "You're alive," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Maybe I never really died. He walked toward me slowly, each step carrying the weight of buried years. And the girl? I opened my bag and handed him the folder I'd prepared before leaving home. Birth certificate, medical records, photos, every piece of proof of a life he'd never known. He took it, reading in silence. His expression barely shifted, only a faint tightening of the jaw, when he reached the first photo of Abby. Then he looked up, and his eyes were no longer cold. "What's her name? Abby?" "She's 8. Smart. Sensitive. And she looks a lot like you." The silence that followed wasn't angry this time. It was heavier. The quiet before a storm that hasn't yet broken but is gathering force beneath the earth. "You kept her from me for 8 years," Vincent said, his voice rough as stone. "And now you come back, because you fear someone more than me?" I held his gaze. "I came back because she's no longer safe. And whether I want to admit it or not, you're the only one strong enough to keep her from what's coming." Vincent didn't reply, but his eyes moved fast, searching, as though reading every truth inside me. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply stepped back and pointed toward the window that looked out over the harbor. "Tomorrow morning. Bring her here. You'll stay. Then we'll talk about how you died." I nodded once, saying nothing. When I left the warehouse, I wasn't sure whose hand I had just shaken, the hand of a father learning how to exist beside his child, or that of a monster deciding whether to spare the mother of that child. But I knew one thing for certain. Vincent knew now, and he would not let anyone touch Abby. Whatever the cost. I didn't sleep at all that night. After the meeting at the warehouse, I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove through Portland's winding streets, my eyes tracing the golden streetlights as if searching for an answer to a question I knew no one could solve. Had I just saved Abby? Or had I handed her over to a darker world than the one I escaped? By the time I returned home, she was fast asleep, arms wrapped tightly around her worn-out stuffed bear. I sat beside her bed for an hour, watching her small face, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, the occasional murmur that came from dreams I hoped would stay innocent forever. I wished everything could stop there, but I knew there was no turning back. At 8 in the morning, I called our neighbors and asked them to watch Abby for a few hours, saying I had an emergency at the hospital. I gathered what I needed: no weapons, or no new documents, just a copy of her medical file, in case I had to prove something. When I drove back toward the old industrial district, the early fog still clung to the rusted rooftops. The air carried the smell of damp metal and oil. Everything there felt cold, even the man waiting for me. The large door was already open. This time, there were no checks, no questions. I walked straight in, the sound of my heels echoing faintly against the wooden floor. Vincent was already there, standing with his back to me, posture straight as steel, Morning light filtered through the tall windows, coating his shoulders in a silver-gray sheen. When he turned, his first glance cut through me like a silent blade. No greeting, no emotion, only silence, and a chill that filled the room like frost. "You came alone," I said, if only to break the air that felt too heavy to breathe. He nodded once, his eyes never leaving mine. I didn't expect otherwise. We stood only a few meters apart, yet it felt like a chasm stretched between us. I didn't know where to begin. He studied me for a long moment before stepping closer, close enough that I could see the changes time had carved into his face. It wasn't just the new scar along his jaw, it was the hardened stillness in his eyes. "Why?" Vincent's voice was rough, like wind scraping against stone. "Why did you choose that path? To vanish? To lie? To fake your death?" I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady, because when I learned I was pregnant, I imagined what it would mean for her to grow up in your world guards outside the door, dinners in a mansion with bulletproof glass, friends whose real names she could never know, and a father who could make a city kneel with a single frown. I didn't want that for my child. His face didn't change, but I saw the faint tension in his hand. I went on. "Back then, I had no other choice. I was afraid not that you would hurt me, but that you would turn her into a symbol of your power. A piece on the board. An asset. I needed freedom to raise her in my own way. And I did. Until now." I was other. No. Vincent said nothing. He walked slowly to the desk where I had left the file the night before. He opened it and studied each page photos of Abby through the years. Her first birthday. As her kindergarten graduation. A blurred picture of her laughing by the koi pond in the park. When he looked up, there was something strange in his eyes. Not anger. Not relief. A deep, hollow sense of loss. As if he were meeting a part of himself he had never known existed. "What does she know about me?" he asked. "Nothing," I admitted. "Only that her father died before she was born. I didn't dare tell her the truth." Vincent gave a slow nod, as though accepting it as inevitable. He turned toward the window, watching the gray morning drift over the harbor. The silence stretched long before he spoke again, his voice low and thick. "I dug an empty grave for you. Stood there for 3 hours. Not a single tear. Not a word. They said I was heartless. But the truth is, I died that day too." I stepped closer, until only a small distance separated us. "I didn't come back for forgiveness. I don't expect to erase what I've done. I came for one reason only, to protect her." Vincent turned, and in the dim morning light, his gaze held both love and ruin. "This world isn't safe anymore. Not for you. Not for her. The people coming aren't like the FBI. They don't wait for courts. They don't need reasons. I can protect her. But you need to understand, once you step back into my world, there's no halfway. It's all or nothing." I nodded, slowly but firmly. "Then let's start over. For our daughter." "I have bid Telfid." Vincent didn't answer. He looked at me for a few seconds more, then turned and walked toward the adjoining room. When the door closed behind him, I stayed where I was, trembling not from fear, but from the certainty that I had just opened a door that could never be closed. And on the other side of it waited not only Vincent, but the world I had once sworn never to return to. But now, I wasn't walking back into it alone. I was walking in for Abby, and for that, I would not turn away. I spent the entire next day sorting through the things I couldn't take with me. The memories hanging on the walls, Abby's favorite books, the old porcelain doll she still kept beside her bed, all of it, I wrapped carefully into small boxes and left stacked in the living room. Not because I thought we would ever come back, but because I needed the illusion that I hadn't yet been erased from this life. I had promised to bring Abby to see Vincent, and that promise wasn't merely a shift in power, it was a ritual. A way to hand my daughter to a man I had once believed was the most dangerous person I would ever know, but who had somehow become the only choice left to keep her safe from a world closing in on us both. When I stopped the car in front of the mansion, Abby sat in the back seat, unaware of what awaited her. I had told her we would be staying for a while at an old friend's house. She didn't ask many questions. She was used to sudden changes, to half answers. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was because I had taught her early that some things in life aren't meant to be asked, only trusted. Vincent's mansion was buried deep within a forest, about 30 minutes outside the city. The iron gate opened as soon as I stopped the car. A red light blinked on a stone pillar camera, as if registering the return of someone erased from the map. Abby looked out the window at the towering trees, then turned to me. "How long are we staying here?" "Mom?" I forced a smile. "Just for a while. It's safe here." The last two words caught in my throat. Safe. Was I trying to convince myself, or lying to a child? Vincent met us in the main hall. He wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Nothing like the Mafia patriarch I remembered from those rigid dinner nights. But his eyes were the same, sharp, deliberate. When his gaze fell on Abby, there was a brief pause. Something between shock and emotion. Abby looked up at him, tilting her head slightly, as if trying to recognize something familiar. "Hello," Vincent said, his voice lower and gentler than I remembered. "Your name is Abby, isn't it?" She nodded, gripping the hem of my coat. He didn't approach. Instead, he gestured toward a woman in a gray suit standing nearby. "This is Julia. She'll take you both to your rooms. If you need anything, ask her." 80, Julia smiled at me, then bent slightly toward Abby. "I've prepared a room with a big window that looks out on the rose garden. I hope you'll like it." Abby turned to me for reassurance, and I nodded, taking her hand as we followed Julia up the staircase. The corridor stretched long, its polished wooden floor glinting under soft lights, the faint scent of mint oil drifting through the air, serene, almost suspiciously so. But I knew better. Every inch of this house had eyes, and ears, and people. Our room was on the second floor, twice the size of our old apartment. There was a reading chair by the window, a small bookshelf, and 2 single beds placed side by side. Abby ran to the zebra-patterned bedding, her eyes lighting up. "Mom, look, there's a drawing table too." I smiled at her, my heart heavy. The quiet in the room was so deep I could hear my own breathing. Once Abby settled in, Julia excused herself, saying dinner would be brought up shortly. I opened the window, looking out toward the back garden. The white roses were in full bloom, so pure they almost seemed unreal. Vincent had kept them just as before, a habit that hadn't faded with time. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Abby's silhouette as she colored. She had no idea that beyond these thick walls, a storm was gathering, people who would stop at nothing to seize a child not out of love, but for power. I knew I had entered a game far beyond my control, but that no longer mattered. All that mattered was keeping Abby safe, and if that meant returning to the world I once fled, then I would do it. Because deep down, I knew this was no choice at all. It was a one-way road, and we had already stepped onto it. The first day in the mansion drifted by like a pale dream, and the second began with a soft light slipping through the curtains, falling across Abby's tousled hair as she slept beside me. The room was so still that I could hear birdsong from the garden beyond, a kind of quiet that made me wary rather than comforted. I rose quietly, pulled on a robe, and went to the window. From there I could see the entire estate stretching below, a walled fortress disguised as a home. Cameras watched from every corner. Guards walked their rounds with mechanical precision. The heavy iron gate at the entrance had remained closed since the moment we arrived. This was not a house. It was a gilded cage, designed so artfully that one could almost forget they were trapped inside. Abby stirred while I was making tea. She rubbed her eyes, sat up, and looked around as if only then remembering we weren't home anymore. But there was no fear in her gaze, only the endless curiosity of a child trying to piece together a new world. "Mom, can we go into the garden today?" I turned toward her, forcing my tone to stay light. "If Julia says yes, you can. But don't go far, and always stay where an adult can see you." "All right," Abby nodded, excitement blooming across her face, as if the walled garden were some great adventure waiting to happen. Julia arrived with breakfast, along with a set of craft supplies, paints, sketchbooks, and several brand new children's books. Everything was meticulously arranged, so thoughtful it felt almost unsettling. Abby squealed with delight, thanked her repeatedly, and ran to the table to begin coloring. I watched her, torn between relief and unease. Part of me wondered if Vincent had arranged all this in advance, or if it was simply his instinctive response upon discovering he had a daughter. Julia suggested showing Abby around the mansion to help her get familiar with the space. I followed close behind, my eyes never leaving her for even a moment. Abby ran ahead, stopping by the rose garden, brushing her fingers over each petal as if she'd found hidden treasure. Julia pointed out the safe areas, the small library, a classroom decorated like a kindergarten, a music room, even a private cinema with leather chairs and a projector. To Abby, it was paradise. To me, it was a labyrinth without an exit map. We passed through a wide hall lined with antique paintings and heavy glass frames dusted by time. Julia stopped before a pair of closed double doors. "The master's room," she said softly. "No one enters without permission." Abby glanced at the doors but quickly ran off toward the reading room. Still, I saw something linger in her eyes. That word master carried a weight far heavier than any title. It held a kind of power Abby couldn't yet understand. But I knew it too well. By afternoon, Abby sat at her little desk, drawing a large picture herself. Me, and beside us a man in a suit whom she called Mr. V. "He looks like you," she said casually. "But his eyes are sad. Maybe he doesn't have any kids to play with?" I froze for a moment, unsure how to answer. I brushed her hair gently and whispered, "Maybe now he will." Abby smiled and bent over her page again, humming softly. In that instant, I realized how quickly she was adapting to this place. Too easily, too fast, and that terrified me. Because when a child begins to think of a place as home, every departure afterward becomes a wound that never truly heals. I knew I had placed her in the middle of a game she didn't understand, a game with no fair rules. But I had no other choice. This house had no escape door. And now, Abby had stepped too far inside to turn back. Vincent did not appear the next morning, nor that afternoon. I knew he was still inside the mansion, because the sound of his footsteps echoed steadily behind the closed double doors at the end of the hallway. The room Julia had called the master's, yet he didn't emerge, didn't ask for Abby, didn't call for me. Part of me felt relief, another part, unease. I didn't know what he was thinking, what he was feeling, or what he might be planning. With Vincent, silence was never just silence. It was the gathering pressure before a storm formed somewhere deep in his mind. Abby, meanwhile, paid it no attention. She lived within the calm innocence of childhood, happily exploring every corner of the garden. She had even named a squirrel she claimed, kept watching Mom with suspicious eyes. She called it Dust. Julia laughed softly when Abby told her about Dust, and for the first time I caught a trace of warmth in her expression. Though Julia worked for Vincent, I didn't feel she was a threat, at least not yet. On the third day, while Abby and I were sitting in the library, Vincent appeared. He entered without announcement, wearing a simple black suit, immaculate as always, his face unreadable. Abby was on the floor, coloring a picture of a park she remembered from before. When she saw him, she looked up, a little hesitant, but not afraid, just instinctively cautious. My pulse quickened. Vincent paused at the threshold, his eyes flicking from me to Abby. "I'm sorry for not greeting you sooner," he said, his voice low but softer than it had been the last time we spoke. "What are you drawing?" Abby glanced at me for permission, then turned back to him. "I'm drawing where I used to live. There was a yellow slide and a small fence, but now I'm here. There's no slide, but there are lots of flowers. Pre-jetted." Vincent stepped farther into the room. Kneeling down just close enough not to make her uncomfortable, he studied the picture and nodded. "You have a good memory, and a good eye for color." Abby smiled. I watched them, realizing it was the first time they had shared the same space without me bridging the distance. I stayed silent. Vincent pointed to a patch of blue on the page. "What's this?" Abby thought for a moment before replying. "I think it's the sky. But that day I was sad. So it's not as blue as usual." Vincent was quiet for a few seconds. "Sometimes the sky in your head doesn't look like the one outside the window," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean it can't change. It's really..." The words caught me off guard. Not because of what they meant, but because of how he said them. His tone wasn't one of command or control. It was human, gentle. Abby seemed to ponder that for a moment, then returned to her drawing. Vincent didn't add anything more. He just stayed there, silent beside her, sharing a space I once thought impossible. After a while, he stood, his eyes meeting mine again, and something had shifted there. He gave a small nod, went a quiet farewell, and left the room. After he was gone, Abby turned to me. "Mom, who is he?" I exhaled slowly and sat beside her. "An old friend of mine. Someone very important." Abby studied me. "He's sad, but he doesn't want anyone to know." I wasn't surprised she sensed it. Abby had always carried a strange sensitivity to people's hidden feelings. I pulled her into my arms and kissed her forehead. "What do you say we help him paint the sky the right color again?" Abby looked up, thoughtful, then nodded. "I'll start with light blue. And a little sunlight. Just a touch of yellow." Well, in the days that followed, Vincent began to appear more often. He didn't talk much, didn't interfere. He was simply there. He watched Abby draw, listened to her talk about her dreams, sometimes handed her old books from his private library. Gradually, his presence stopped making her hesitant. She began calling him Uncle Vincent, and sometimes just Uncle V, the way she named everything. Once she asked if he could play the piano, and he told her he had learned as a boy. The next day, the piano in the music room was freshly tuned, and Abby sat beside him for an hour, learning her first chords. Their bond did not begin with blood, it began with curiosity. But like sunlight slipping through a narrow crack, it slowly touched corners I thought no one could reach. Vincent never called Abby his daughter, but he listened to her the way a father listens to his first child. And I knew, from that moment on, everything had begun to change. Not just for Vincent, but for all of us. The rain began at dusk, each drop heavy, striking the window of the reading room like the quiet knocking of someone on the other side of the world. I was reading to Abby, her small body leaning against my shoulder, her hair soft against the pillow, her breathing steady and warm. The golden light from the desk lamp filled the room with a peace so perfect it felt artificial. For days, I had carried a faint sense of foreboding, like a thin mist hovering around dreams one never dares to tell. Vincent had been gone since morning. Julia said he had left to deal with something urgent and would return late. He hadn't left a message. He hadn't called. I knew his silence, how it always deepened before the weight of something larger. Words, for Vincent, were a luxury reserved for moments when decisions had already been made in the dark. The rain grew heavier. I stood, kissed Abby's forehead, and left the room to fetch some tea. Julia was out of the main house. The guards at the front gate had switched shifts at 10, and for the first time in days, I felt it. The stillness of the house was wrong. Too still. No footsteps pacing the halls. No radio from the staff quarters. And most unnerving of all, the small blue light of the security system at the foot of the stairs had gone dark. I froze halfway down the staircase, heart pounding. Then came a sound from outside, not loud, but distinct. The metallic groan of the front gate unlocking, the kind of sound made by someone who knew the code. The one only Vincent and a handful of trusted people were supposed to have. I stepped back, cold spreading through my palms. No Vincent. No Julia. No one else inside the mansion but me and Abby. I ran upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and pressed my ear to the wall. A minute later, the faint creak of floorboards, then heavy footsteps, more than one, at least 3. I pulled Abby from bed. She was still half asleep, confused. My voice shook as I whispered in the dark. trying to make it sound like a game. Listen, sweetheart. No talking. We're playing the quiet game. Whoever stays quiet the longest gets 2 popsicles. Abby nodded, clutching her stuffed bear tight. I led her to the small storage room in the corner, the one with the secondary escape hatch leading to the wine cellar. I had never imagined I'd use it. But Vincent had shown it to me our first week here. His eyes cold and certain. If anything happens, use this route. Don't open the main door. Don't call anyone. Just run. I locked Abby inside, cupped her face, and whispered, "Don't come out until I return. No one opens this door but me. Do you understand?" She wanted to speak but only nodded. I closed the door, gripping the handle tight, then turned back toward the stairs. The footsteps were closer now. When I reached the ground floor, I saw them clearly, 3 men in black under the dim lights. They were armed. 2 held pistols. The third, taller, wore leather gloves and bore a long scar running from his left cheek down to his chin. He looked up at me with a gaze that said he already knew exactly who I was. "You're the doctor," he said, his voice carrying a trace of Italian. "Good. We don't want to hurt anyone, but you'll need to cooperate." I said nothing. My palms were slick with sweat. They had disabled the security system. That meant someone inside had helped them, or worse. They had something far beyond betrayal. I kept my tone even. "What do you want?" The scarred man smiled faintly. "We only want the child. No blood needs to spill. But if you resist, we won't hesitate." My blood turned to ice. He knew. They all knew. And Vincent wasn't here. I don't remember how I started running. Only the sound of gunfire exploding behind me. Splinters flying from the staircase as bullets tore through the wood. I ran as if something primal had taken over. The pure instinct of a mother defending her child. When I reached the storage room, Abby was there, eyes wide with fear. I grabbed her, pulling her toward the wine cellar door. Footsteps thundering behind us. Another shot cracked the air, close enough to singe it. But it missed. The cellar door slammed shut behind us, and darkness swallowed us whole. In that darkness, I could hear our breaths, hers fast and trembling, mine ragged and uneven. I held her close, heart pounding so violently I thought it might give us away. I didn't know if we would escape, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight, the war had begun, and it would not end until one side had nothing left to lose. The cellar was pitch black, save for the faint glow of a single emergency lamp flickering overhead. Its dying light just enough for me to see the slick stone steps leading downward and to realize that Abby was trembling in my arms, her face pressed against my shoulder. Silent as a prayer, she dared not speak. The gunfire had stopped, but the noise above continued, glass shattering, heavy footsteps racing through the hall, the desperate shout of someone being struck down. I didn't dare guess who was still standing and who wasn't. Each passing second stretched like a heartbeat I had to fight to keep alive. We moved through the narrow passageway toward the old storage building at the edge of the property, the secret escape route Vincent had built years ago. Known only to a few. I remembered the path because he had shown it to me once, long ago. His voice low and grave as he said, "Never forget this way." When I pushed open the iron door at the end of the tunnel, the smell of fresh blood hit me like a slap. One of the attackers lay sprawled across the concrete floor, a widening pool of crimson beneath him. His face was pale, his hand clutching the torn flesh of his abdomen as blood pulsed between his fingers. He was still alive, eyes wide in disbelief, as if refusing to accept his own death. Abby let out a small cry. I immediately covered her eyes, pulling her back against the largest crate in the room. My mind raced. I had to choose fast, and with clarity. This was the man who had hunted me, who had pointed a gun at my head and threatened to take my child. But I was a doctor. That title had never left me, no matter how many names I'd changed or how far I'd buried my past. I wasn't saving him because he deserved to live. I was saving him because I refused to let my daughter see her mother turn away from a dying man, even if he was the enemy. I tore open the first aid kit from the corner, ripping his shirt to expose the wound, a bullet through the ribs, shattering part of the liver, blood flowing like a river. With bare hands, I pressed a gauze pad hard against it, checked his pulse, his breathing, and forced myself to speak the medical steps under my breath, as if the rhythm of instruction could keep panic from taking over. From my pocket, I drew a pen, stabbed it gently into his neck to create an airway, then quickly wrapped his abdomen tight with bandages. I knew he needed a hospital. He wouldn't make it long. But at least now he might survive long enough to realize that the person who had spared him wasn't the man who shot him but the woman he'd tried to destroy. As I tied the last knot under the flickering light, footsteps stopped at the door. I turned, bracing myself, but it was Vincent. He stood there, drenched from the rain, his shirt torn, his face carved with the cold precision of someone who had walked through hell. His eyes found mine. Then the half-dead man at my feet. He said nothing for a long time, just looked. There was no anger in his gaze, only a quiet recognition of something he could not understand, that after everything, I was still Aaron Callahan, the woman who could despise someone to the bone and still kneel beside him to save his life. "Why did you save him?" Vincent's voice was hoarse, scraped raw. I rose, wiping the blood from my hands onto my sleeve, and met his stare. "Because I'm a doctor, and because she's watching me." Vincent turned his eyes to Abby, who still clutched her bear, her wide eyes unblinking. He gave a small nod, said nothing more, and signaled to his men. They came in with a stretcher, lifted the wounded man, and carried him away. I didn't ask what they would do with him. I didn't need to know. When they were gone, only Vincent, Abby, and I remained in the echoing warehouse. I knelt and gathered Abby close, feeling her small heartbeat against my chest. Vincent stood motionless, his face no longer cold but filled with the heavy silence of a man witnessing something beyond his grasp. In that moment, I didn't need praise. I didn't need forgiveness. I only needed Abby to see that her mother hadn't changed, that even in a world dripping with blood and vengeance, I still held onto the one piece of myself that hadn't rotted away. And Vincent, standing there in the downpour. We must have seen it too. That sometimes, mercy is the most terrifying act of all, in a war with no way out. The rain hadn't stopped when Vincent led me out of the warehouse. Abby was taken back to her room by Julia, who promised to keep her calm. I knew Vincent wouldn't let the night end as just a failed attack. He never left threats alive, not until he knew exactly where they came from. But this time, it wasn't about protecting an empire or a name. It was about protecting his daughter. I followed him through a side corridor, down to the second basement beneath the main house, a place I had never been allowed to enter. The heavy metal door opened to a room without windows. Concrete walls cold as bone. White lights so harsh they exposed every old stain that hadn't been scrubbed away. In the center, the man I'd saved lay strapped to a steel chair, wrists bound in thick leather, head drooping but consciousness flickering behind half-lidded eyes. His gaze lifted when he heard the door open, locking onto Vincent, who stood in front of him like a ghost given form. No one spoke at first. Only the steady dripping of water from a pipe in the corner filled the silence, each drop counting down like a clock. Vincent gestured for me to stand behind the one-way glass along the wall. He wanted me to listen but not interfere. I obeyed, though my hands still smelled of blood. My mind tangled between pity and dread. I had kept this man alive, and now I would watch him be stripped of whatever humanity remained. Vincent pulled a chair across the floor and sat opposite the man, close enough for breath to touch breath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. His tone was low, steady, and terrifying in its calm, the kind of voice that slips into your nightmares and never leaves. "Name," he said. The man gave a weak, blood-stained grin. "You know who I am. Otherwise, you wouldn't have kept me alive." "Gretchen." Vincent tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as if trying to peer through rotting flesh to whatever truth hid underneath. "I know where you came from," he said. "I want to know who sent you and why the child." "It's not Ress's." The man was silent for a long moment. Then, with a broken breath, as though surrender had finally crept into his lungs, he muttered, I don't know his real name, only that he's old, very old. And once, he was your friend. It's not Ressa's. Vincent didn't flinch, but I saw his hand curl ever so slightly. How much did he pay you? It wasn't about money, the man rasped. Trying to lift his head, he said, the girl was the key. The guarantee, the way to make you kneel. It said it. The air in the room changed, pulled tight like a wire about to snap. I saw Vincent lean forward, the calm in his expression breaking, revealing something raw, something only a father could feel when his blood was threatened. Who? He demanded, his voice no longer even. Who's insane enough to touch my child? The man began to tremble, then laughed a wet, broken sound caught between fear and madness. He has a twin-headed serpent tattoo on his left wrist. Speaks Italian like you but thicker. He knows the child carries your blood. And he said, it's a debt that was never paid. 2. Vincent rose abruptly, the metal chair clattering to the floor with a sharp, echoing clang. He turned toward the glass, and for a moment, his eyes met mine. I had never seen that look before, not rage, but something deeper. Betrayal, the kind that claws straight through the bones. He signaled to his men, then walked out without another word. I stayed for a moment longer. The wounded man turned his head toward me, a twisted smile trembling on his lips, mouthing words I couldn't hear, but whatever they were sent a chill straight through me. When I stepped out into the hallway, Vincent was already there, leaning against the wall, staring at nothing. I approached him quietly. The man he mentioned, you know who it is? Don't you? He didn't answer at first. Then, finally, he nodded once. Someone who should have died with my past, but he didn't. And now he's come back for what matters most. And Frest, I reached for his hand, not out of fear, not out of anger, but out of understanding. Vincent's fingers tightened around mine. A silent promise. Behind us, the door to the interrogation room slammed shut, and somewhere deep inside that cold, echoing mansion, the truth had finally clawed its way out of the dark, a truth that would change everything we thought we were fighting for. The morning sky was impossibly clear, as though the night of rain and gunfire had been nothing more than a fever dream. The white roses in the garden bloomed brighter than ever, their fragrance heavy in the cool air. Abby was still asleep, worn out from what she'd endured. I sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee in my hands, watching a guard's silhouette move across the courtyard. Since the attack, the mansion had been swallowed by layers of security sections sealed off. New guards brought in, every sound muffled beneath the weight of vigilance. The suffocation didn't come from the walls, but from what was left unsaid, the cautious glances, the quiet footsteps, the constant sense that peace had been replaced by suspicion. Vincent hadn't appeared all day. I knew he was hunting the man behind the ambush, and I knew he wouldn't stop until he had his answer. But what unsettled me most wasn't his absence, it was the silence between us since the interrogation room, since that look through the glass that I couldn't shake. That evening, Julia knocked and said Vincent wanted to see me in his study. She offered no explanation. I didn't ask. I simply nodded. Abby was still asleep, so I asked Julia to stay with her. The study was dimmer than usual, lit only by the soft amber glow of a wooden desk lamp. Vincent sat behind the desk. No jacket. His sleeves rolled. Collarundon. His body leaning back slightly, as if the day had weighed heavily on him. But when he looked up, his eyes were still sharp, too sharp. We need to talk, he said quietly. About what happens next. I was thinking the same, I replied. Taking the seat opposite him, he placed a thin folder in front of me. No name, no markings. Inside were documents, a new passport, a new birth certificate for Abby under a different surname, even a full set of fabricated school records, flawless in every detail. You want me to disappear again? I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. No, Vincent said. I want you to choose. A real choice. Stay under my protection, or leave with everything you need to remain untraceable. But you need to understand something. Everything's changed now. Abby isn't just a name anymore. She's my daughter. And our enemies know it. Described it. I leaned back, eyes never leaving his. And if I stay, he didn't blink, then I'll protect you both with everything I have. But you'll have to live by the rules here. Security. Structure. Control. Your freedom won't be what it was. You won't be the doctor walking the streets of Portland anymore. You'll be the mother of my child. Living in my world, no hiding. No running. Described. I said nothing for a long time. Outside, the wind rattled the window. Impatient, I thought of Abby, of how she was already adapting. Learning the piano. Painting with Julia. Laughing in a garden surrounded by guards. I thought of her small body trembling in the cellar, and how I couldn't have saved her without him. I didn't trust the world Vincent lived in, but I trusted the way he looked at Abby, and that meant more than any promise could. I'll stay, I said finally, but on one condition. If you not, Vincent raised a brow. I won't become part of your system. I'm a doctor. I'll keep working as one if I'm needed. I don't want Abby growing up behind glass, guarded by men with guns and fed lies disguised as fairy tales. And I want the truth, all of it. If someone out there is coming for her, I want to know before they reach the door. Tencher. Vincent was silent for a while, then nodded slowly. You have my word. Tencher. No papers were signed. No hands were shaken. But the agreement bound us tighter than any contract could. I stood to leave. And he spoke again. One more thing. Two. I turned back. His eyes were softer now. Weary in a way I'd never seen. Like the first crack in a wall he'd spent a lifetime building. Don't leave without saying goodbye this time, he said. I don't think I could bear it again. Two. My chest tightened. I didn't answer. I simply stepped out, closing the door behind me. The sound of it felt final, yet not like an ending. Because this time, I wasn't running. Not out of fear, but because I had a reason to stay. And that reason was sleeping upstairs. In a house that no longer felt like a prison, but the only place left where hope could still fit. The days that followed unfolded like a quiet dream, one without shadows. Though the silence still carried its own weight. None of us said out loud that things had changed. But the way we moved through the same space was proof enough. Abby woke each morning smiling, running to wrap her arms around me before darting downstairs to find Vincent. No one told her to do it. No one taught her how. But some connections don't need words. Perhaps blood carries signals that only a child's heart can hear. Long before adults learn how to hide them. Vincent was no longer the silent figure in the hallways, or the man who emerged from darkness with a voice like a command. He began joining us at breakfast, listening to Abby chatter about her dreams, or about her plan to grow carrots among the rose bushes. The first time I heard Vincent laugh, I froze halfway through my spoonful of cereal. It wasn't loud. It didn't last long, but it was real, and it made me look up, as if I'd stumbled upon a secret passage inside a familiar house. Abby started calling him Uncle V. Sometimes, Daddy V. Though I'd never once spoken that word aloud. I didn't correct her. Some words, when they come naturally, are best left untouched. Julia went about her duties as quietly as ever. But sometimes I caught her gaze softening when she saw the three of us together at breakfast. Or when Vincent bent to tie Abby's shoelaces in the courtyard. I had once thought a man like him didn't know how to kneel. But it turned out, for the right person, he could do things I never thought possible. I reopened one of the smaller rooms in the mansion and turned it into a makeshift medical space. I treated minor injuries, and ran checkups, and, in a way, kept it as proof that I wasn't a prisoner here. Vincent respected that boundary. He never interfered, never asked what I was doing. Instead, he had new cabinets installed, better lamps, and even brought in medical equipment I used to wait weeks for in Portland. That little room became my world inside his, a fragile autonomy wrapped in quiet gratitude. Afternoons often unfolded the same way. Abby played piano in the living room. Vincent read in his armchair, and I sat nearby, jotting notes or simply watching them. A little girl with messy curls and curious eyes, a man with an old scar on his left hand and a faraway look, And me, the woman who once ran from them both. 3 separate lives somehow stitched into one still image. Whole in its imperfection. I didn't dare call it a family. The word still caught in my throat. But I started to recognize the small things I'd never had. A hand on my shoulder when I was tired. A quiet, "You okay?" at the end of the day. The way his eyes followed me as I left a room. Tiny gestures, but enough to soothe the bruises no one could see. The darkness still existed. Of course, there were phone calls in the middle of the night. Sudden disappearances, Vincent never explained. I knew the world beyond the gates was far from calm, but within these walls, for the first time, Abby and I were no longer living in fear. One afternoon, Abby painted a picture of 3 people standing together in the rain. When I asked why the rain, she said softly, "Because rain makes people stand closer." I looked at that drawing for a long time. Maybe, of all the mistakes I'd made, choosing to stay had been the one thing I got right. Not because I trusted Vincent completely. Not because I believed we could ever become a perfect family. But because I'd started to believe something could grow even from the deepest cracks, something small, fragile, and alive. And in this strange house, between 2 people I once called by very different names, Abby and I were learning to live again. Not to escape, but to exist. Together. That night, Abby fell asleep earlier than usual after an afternoon spent running through the garden and chasing her new teddy bear down the hallways. A gift Julia had brought back from town. I tucked her blanket in, turned off the bedside lamp, and lingered by the window, watching moonlight spill across the dark crowns of trees. There was something stirring in me I couldn't quite name, a feeling like an old wound beginning to ache under new skin. I slipped out of the room as quietly as breath, my footsteps soft against the wooden floor that seemed to hum beneath the weight of silence. When I neared the library, I stopped. The door was half open, and a stripe of warm light stretched across the corridor. I heard the rustle of pages, the faint exhale of someone thinking too hard. It was a sound I knew too well. My heart tightened, a string drawn and released in one motion. I pushed the door open. Vincent was sitting alone beside the tall shelves, a glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes unfocused, staring into a distance no book could reach. When he looked up, he didn't startle. It was as if he had been waiting. I said nothing, just took the chair across from him, resting my hands on the old wooden table between us. The silence that settled wasn't tense anymore, but it wasn't peace either. Vincent set down his glass, his gaze holding mine. "You always get this quiet before you say something that matters." End quote. I gave a faint smile. "And you always say things that matter like they're the most ordinary truths." End quote. He leaned back, his eyes darker now. The kind of darkness that gathers where time has lingered too long. Maybe that's because I never learned how to speak honestly. End quote. I brushed my fingertips along the table's edge. The wood was cool, rough beneath my skin. I don't even know how much truth I have left. But there's one thing I've never told you, though I should have long ago. Eniger. Vincent didn't move. His gaze didn't waver. I swallowed hard, each word coming slow and deliberate, like cutting through something that still bleeds. I didn't leave because I was afraid. I left because I believed you would never stop, that you'd never pull yourself out of that spiral of blood and power. And I couldn't let Abby grow up in a world where a gun sits closer than a book. Eniger. He didn't answer right away. His head lowered, fingers interlaced tightly. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, nearly breaking. "I know, but when you disappeared without a word, without a trace, I thought I'd been betrayed. Not just by the woman I loved, but by the only hope I ever had. Everyone." My fingers pressed against the edge of the table until my chest ached. Back then, I didn't know how to hold on to something without breaking it. I was weak and selfish. "Everyone." Vincent lifted his head. I saw something fracture behind his eyes, not anger, not blame, but the slow rise of an old pain, resurfacing after too long buried. "If you'd said something, just one word, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I would have changed sooner." "Terd." I shook my head. My voice came out small, trembling. "No. Vincent, Men like you don't change because someone leaves or stays. You only change when you finally see yourself in someone else's eyes. And you saw that in Abby's, not mine. Adigal. He stood quietly, walking to the window. Outside, the night was thick as ink. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. The first time I saw her, I didn't know what to do with what I felt. I saw myself in her, not in her eyes or her hair, but in her loneliness. Adigal. I rose and stepped closer. Abby isn't alone. She has me. And now she has you. As long as we're brave enough not to hide from it anymore. Adigal. Vincent turned to face me, his expression closer than it had ever been. I've never apologized. I don't believe apologies can fix anything. But if what you want is the truth, then this is it. 2-0. I looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't see the man shaped by violence and control, but the man who had once loved me imperfectly, recklessly, but completely. I placed my hand against his chest, feeling the steady, heavy rhythm beneath. I don't need an apology. I just need to know you'll stay. Not for me. For her. NSA. Vincent nodded. Slowly. The weight of it anchoring the room. I'll stay. For both of you. NSA. And we stood there. In the old library, surrounded by half-read pages, and the quiet of a night that seemed to be listening. No more words were needed. Because sometimes, forgiveness doesn't come through language, it comes through the simple, trembling courage of choosing to stay. The morning sky was the color of ash, stretching low over the trees like a heavy blanket pressed against the hill. The air inside the mansion felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because something in Vincent had shifted. I sensed it in the way he looked at me when I entered the dining room, where Abby was clumsily trying to mix cocoa into her milk. His gaze toward her was gentle, familiar, but the one he gave me carried a quiet finality, as though he had made a decision during the night and was now ready to speak it aloud. After breakfast, he asked me to walk with him into the garden, where the silence hung so thick it almost had weight. We moved slowly through rows of flowers wilting with the season, neither of us speaking for the first few minutes. Then Vincent broke the stillness. I've made arrangements, he said, his voice low. If you decide to leave, everyone. I stopped, the words catching like cold metal in my chest. Leave? He nodded, eyes fixed on the gravel path at our feet. New documents, a new identity, a small house in Colorado remote. Safe. No one will find you. There's protection in place. A good school for Abby, and a small hospital nearby if you want to keep practicing medicine. It's also said, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. Everything I had once dreamed of, what I'd fought for when I walked away from him 8 years ago, was now laid neatly before me, offered not as an escape, but as a gift. And yet my heart didn't feel lighter. I steadied my voice. Why are you doing this? Vincent didn't look up. Because you deserve a choice. The last time, you left in fear with no time. No control. This time, I want you to know you can go. And I won't stop you. Desmond too. My hands trembled. And Abby, when he turned to me, his eyes weren't cold. They were unbearably human. She's a part of you. If you leave, I won't fight for custody. I just ask for the chance to see her once a month. Maybe less. Whatever feels safe for you. Desmond too. Something inside me ached, deep and raw. For years, I'd wished for this, for Vincent to give me freedom, to give me the right to choose without running. But now that it was here, I realized I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the mother clutching a child in a suitcase, running from a life built on shadows. I was the woman who had watched Vincent pick up the broken pieces of himself through the reflection in our daughter's eyes. You think I'll go? I asked softly. He shook his head. I don't know, but I don't want you to stay because of debt or fear. If you stay, I want it to be because you truly choose to. As Dignet minted, a chill breeze swept past, raising goosebumps along my arms. I looked around the garden at the path where Abby had run with her teddy bear, at the bench where I'd once read while piano music drifted from the house. I thought of the quiet we'd found in small, ordinary moments. of Vincent holding Abby through a nightmare. Wordless but steady. And I knew then what I needed wasn't freedom to flee but courage to remain. "I'm not leaving," I said, my eyes never leaving his. "Not because I'm afraid of losing you, but because I found myself here, and I don't want my daughter growing up in a life made of goodbyes." To the Steneged. Vincent didn't speak right away. Then he stepped closer and placed his hand on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it carried more truth than any promise. "Thank you," he whispered, as if he'd been holding those words inside for years. And we stood there, in the fading garden of a changing season, no papers, no vows, no declarations, just the presence of two people who had once been each other's darkness, now standing quietly in a fragile light, an offer of freedom, and a choice to stay. That night, I sat beside Abby's bed, watching her sleep with one small arm wrapped around the old teddy bear Julia had mended more than once. The soft glow of the nightlight painted her face in strokes of gold, peaceful, unguarded, pure. She would never know that only hours earlier, her mother could have taken her away from this place forever, away from Vincent, away from the past, away from fear itself. But I hadn't. I hadn't packed a single bag, hadn't woken her in the dark, hadn't mapped out a new city to disappear into. Not because I believed this place was completely safe, or because I trusted Vincent without question, but because in Abby's eyes, I saw something I had never known as a child, a sense of belonging. The mornings she ran barefoot through the garden, the laughter when Vincent lifted her high into the air, the way she sat at the piano, singing songs she invented, nonsense, melodies full of sweetness. She never asked why we lived here. She simply accepted it, as though everything was right where it belonged. And for the first time, I felt the same. I no longer felt like a guest in my own life. Vincent never brought up the offer to leave again. He didn't have to. He could see the answer in the way I stayed, in the way I joined Abby at breakfast each morning, called for Julia when needed, or rearranged the medical supplies in the study downstairs. I never spoke my decision aloud, but every small gesture carried the same truth. I had chosen to stay. Not because I was weak, not because I was bound, but because I'd begun to believe something I once thought impossible, that a person can change, that broken things can be pieced together again. Not perfectly, not seamlessly, but enough to exist within each other. I didn't sleep that night. I went out to the balcony, where the air was cool and the wind moved through the trees like the whisper of a distant sea. Vincent was there, holding a cup of tea, not whiskey. I joined him without a word. We stood side by side, silent as two scars that had long stopped hurting but never disappeared. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "I used to think if I could keep you close, everything would be fine. But now I realize it was never about keeping. It's about letting you choose to stay." End quote. I looked toward the dark horizon. "And I've chosen." End quote. He nodded slowly. "Not out of fear?" I met his eyes, the same eyes I had once fled from. "No. For Abby, because I don't want her to grow up surrounded by departures. I want her to have roots. And if this is the only place she's ever felt safe, I won't take that away from her. It's kind of fine as." Vincent set his cup down and turned to face me fully. "I'll do everything I can to make sure she never sees the darker side of who I was. And if there ever comes a day you no longer feel safe, you just tell me. I'll let you go. No conditions. It's kind of fine as." I nodded. Not as a promise, but as recognition that I heard him, that I understood, and that I no longer feared him the way I once did. I was no longer the woman running down a foggy road with a newborn pressed to her chest, sweat and tears blurring into one. I was a mother standing between two paths, and for the first time, I stayed not because of fear, but because of love. Love for my daughter, and love, unspoken but real, for the man beside me who was learning to rebuild himself from ashes. The night grew colder, yet something inside me warmed, because I had made my choice, and it was, without question, the freest decision I had ever made. Abby first called Vincent Dad, on a soft, sunlit morning when she slipped in the garden and fell. The scrape on her knee was small, Nothing more than a faint red mark. But her cry sliced through me as if it were the first time she'd ever known pain. Vincent had been standing on the porch with a cup of coffee still steaming in his hand. He dropped it without hesitation and ran to her. He scooped her up, held her close, and whispered, "You're okay? You're okay," over and over. And in that trembling breath between sobs, Abby pressed her face into his shoulder and let out a single word, "Dad." It came so softly, so naturally, as if it had been resting inside her all along, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. Vincent froze for a second, just enough to let the weight of the word settle into him, then pulled her even closer. From where I stood, watching, my throat tightened and my eyes burned. Something had been mended between them quietly, without ceremony but stronger than any promise ever made. From that day, Abby changed in ways I hadn't imagined. She laughed more, asked more questions, her wide eyes lighting up whenever Julia told a story, or Vincent knelt beside her to teach her how to care for the roses. Though the mansion remained tightly guarded, she no longer feared the men in black stationed at the corners of the grounds. She greeted them, sometimes even remembered their names, something she would never have done before. Vincent began staying home more often, canceling meetings that could wait and moving the important ones to the annex behind the house so he could have dinner with us. At the table, he was no longer the man with a shadowed past or the authority that made others lower their eyes. He was simply a father awkward, learning, trying to ask about lessons, about toys, about dreams. Once, Abby ran in from the garden holding a small wildflower, pressed it into his hand, and said, "Keep it, so you don't forget me." Vincent stared at it for a long time, the tiny stem trembling between his fingers, as though it were made of glass. I didn't ask what he was thinking. I didn't need to, because I was keeping my own collection of quiet treasures too. Julia started teaching Abby how to bake, the kitchen filled with flour and laughter, and sometimes with chaos dough in her hair, streaks of sugar across her shirt. I let Abby choose her own clothes, brush her own hair, take responsibility for small, simple things. When she said she wanted to learn to draw, I turned a small spare room into her studio, a world of color where she hung her paintings. In one of them, she drew me and Vincent, holding hands beneath a tree, both of us smiling too wide to be real. In another, Julia stood with a tray of pastries, and behind us was a big shaggy dog we didn't have. When I asked why there was a dog, Abby giggled and said, "Because every family should have one." Mommy, I couldn't argue with that kind of logic. In the afternoons, she would sit by the piano and hum songs. She invented songs without words, full of light, sometimes wistful, always unmistakably her. I would sit in the living room, eyes closed, and listen. Her music felt like proof that the world had forgiven us a little, that life could still be gentle enough for her to grow inside it. She no longer flinched at doors opening, no longer tensed at raised voices. And at night, before falling asleep, she would whisper, "Mommy, what are we doing tomorrow?" As if tomorrow were a promise she could trust. Each time, I would pull her close, smile against her hair, and whisper, "Anything you want, as long as it makes you happy." Because after all the choices, the mistakes, and the scars, the only thing I truly wanted was this: to see my daughter live like a child should, to cry over scraped knees, to laugh over crooked drawings, to believe the world was still soft enough to hold her gently. And if keeping that innocence meant I had to face the darkness of my past again someday, I would do it without hesitation. For her childhood, and for the heart of a mother who, at last, had learned what peace feels like. Night descended softly, like a velvet shroud draping over the mansion in a rare hush of peace. Abby had already fallen asleep after a day filled with sunshine and laughter. I had just closed her favorite storybook, turned off the nightlight, and stepped into the hallway when I heard hurried footsteps. Julia appeared, her face pale, her voice trembling as she whispered that Vincent had returned and he was hurt. My heart clenched. Without a word, I ran to the medical room. Vincent sat there, his shirt darkened by blood at the shoulder, his right hand clutching his arm where the wound still bled. His face was ashen, yet his eyes were alert. One of his men explained it was a graze, a bullet that had missed its mark but close enough to draw blood during what had clearly been an uneasy meeting. I didn't ask for details. I didn't scold or panic. I rolled up my sleeves, slipped on gloves, and began to treat the wound as I had hundreds of times before, but this time, my hands trembled, because the man before me wasn't just another patient. He was someone I had loved, feared, and finally learned to forgive. Vincent didn't flinch or groan. He simply watched me with a stillness that made the air itself seem to hold its breath, as though each gentle touch steadied him more than any anesthetic could. When I tied the final stitch and wrapped the bandage, he spoke, his voice low, like wind brushing through the hollow of night. He asked if I was still afraid of the blood, of the life that would always come with moments like this. I didn't answer right away. I sat across from him, pulled off my gloves, and let the silence stretch. Then I said that yes, I was still afraid, but some things are worth fearing because there are things more precious than absolute safety. I told him that physical wounds would heal, but what we were trying to rebuild, the fragile peace between us, needed to be healed every single day, with trust and tenderness. Vincent said nothing. He simply reached up, brushed a stray lock of hair from my face, and looked at me with eyes that had lost their sharpness, eyes of a man who had wandered too long in darkness and finally found a place to rest. And in that small, sterile room, beneath the amber glow of a single lamp and the faint scent of antiseptic, I realized that sometimes the simplest moments are the most profound. A hand held briefly, a silent understanding, a shared gaze between two souls that once broke apart. That night, there were no more gunshots, no lurking shadows, only the soft rhythm of rain against the window and the steady sound of two people breathing side by side, not fugitives, not enemies, but two human beings learning to mend each other, one quiet night at a time. My dear listeners, tonight's story is not just about Aaron and Vincent. It's a reminder that all of us, at some point, lose our way and hurt the people we love. But what matters most is not the past we carry, but the choice we make now to stay, to love, and to heal. Some wounds take time, but when tended with sincerity, they can become the very place where something new and beautiful begins. If this story has touched your heart, if you've ever faced fear, carried scars, or found the courage to forgive, share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your story, because each of us is writing a chapter of our own, full of emotion, growth, and grace. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our channel to experience more heartfelt tales like this one. Thank you for joining us tonight. May you and your loved ones stay healthy, live in peace, and find meaning in every moment. Goodbye, and see you in the next story.